right, everyone. As folks are trickling back in, we have another exercise, which is what felt most important to you as a teenager. These are the sticky notes, right? Yes. And so you can put in a phrase, you can put in a sentence, and we started. Oh. And it will show up as little sticky notes for your answers. So take a moment to just think back, maybe recently, maybe longer ago.
Well, what would you put down?
Let's see. What felt most important to me as a teenager? I feel like probably I was pretty studious. So I feel like academics and friendship. I think, yeah, friendship.
Definitely the Hunger Games for me.
I partied a lot.
The movies or the book, Nina?
Both.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's take a look.
Oh, friendship.
Family, being included. Authentic connections with friends.
That friends or Friends TV show?
Hey, nobody's putting romance. See, that is my theory, that it hasn't changed, that this has actually always been what kids wanted.
Health equity. As a teenager, I commend you for that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you all for inputting your answers. I'm going to hand it off to, you know her, you love her, Dr. Yalda Uhls.
Hello, I'm back. And hopefully we can now bring on our amazing panelists, Meg LeFauve, longtime friend of mine, incredibly talented filmmaker, writer, producer, mom, all sorts of things, and Dr. Abigail Baird, neuroscientist, great believer in sharing science with the public, and very, very knowledgeable about the teenage brain. So I will ask you each to quickly just introduce yourselves and say hi to the audience, starting with you, Meg. And tell us where you're calling in from.
Yes, I'm calling in from the Austin Film Festival, where I'm here doing panels and teaching. But really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Abigail, go ahead.
I'm calling in from the great town of Poughkeepsie, New York. I can't even believe that I was invited to be here. I'm thrilled. It's going to be a fun discussion.
Hi, Meg. You can't see me, probably. Okay, Inside Out 2 was a huge success. I think biggest animated movie of all time, possibly bigger than anything else. Highest grossing films of all time globally. I remember talking to you before it came out when, you never know, but it achieved all the things. And a lot of that, I think, has to do with Meg and the work that she does. The movie does an incredible job capturing a key time of development, which, as you know, at the center, we really think about adolescence. Adolescents are starting to form their unique identities. They're navigating more complicated emotions. So I'm actually going to start with Dr. Baird. And from a scientific perspective, can you tell us more about what happens to the teenage brain as kids begin to go through puberty?
Okay, well, first, please call me Abigail, because if someone has an injury, I'm not going to really probably be very helpful. So it's really,
unless it's mental.
That's a 5-minute answer, just what happens in brain and puberty. Well, a lot of people have heard about the frontal cortex. It gets a lot of attention as the executive center of the brain, but it's really actually more like a board of directors. And if you can picture a board of directors running a big company, what happens during puberty is that the internal and external demands on a kid change. So their own internal drives and thoughts and cognitions, emotions, all that stuff biologically grows, but at the same time, their physicality and changes are putting them in different social worlds. And so the brain has to help them accommodate that. And so again, back to this analogy of sort of a board of directors supervising a bunch of different departments that are going to change in size and change in functionality. So when you think about brain growth, the head doesn't grow very much. The head stays the same size. So how does it grow? And it grows actually by improving the coordination between different areas and improving the communication between different areas and the speed with which those areas can talk to each other. So one of the best examples, and you see it over and over again, so wonderfully illustrated Inside Out, is the sort of quick connections between the understanding of the experience that's happening and then the emotion that's attached to it. And those conversations tend to get pretty intense during adolescence.
And are they more intense then than other time periods, developmental time periods?
So it's a great question because they certainly look like they are, but a lot of science points to folks who have intense emotions as being people who probably always had them. During adolescence, the frontal lobes are very busy doing lots of things. You're again, that board of directors is stretched really thin, and a couple of them fall asleep a lot too because they're exhausted from doing a lot of that. And one of the goals of development is to actually learn about our own emotionality. And so during puberty and adolescence, we get a lot of practice time. In a perfect world, we get a lot of practice time. And again, something Inside Out illustrates beautifully. We get a lot of time to make some mistakes, learn about our emotionality, and then hopefully, learn to, with that executive system, with that board of directors, pull our emotions into a range that matches the society that we're living in.
Yeah, it's interesting. We had some teens earlier, and we asked them what shows get wrong about teens, and when they're representing all teens, and some of them said, all girls aren't moody. So exactly what you're saying. It's like even though the brain is reacting, some people will get more moody, but not everybody. Meg, from a storytelling perspective, how did you decide to portray some of these key moments that happen in teenagers' brains?
Well, as a storyteller, we did research, of course, with mostly emotion experts, not so much physical brain, because from the very beginning, Pete Docter, who began the series, it's a metaphor. It's not, we wanted. I mean, there was conversations about frontal lobe and how could you do that, but it's too physicalization versus a metaphor. So, and the whole movie really came from Kelsey Mann, the director, pitching at Pixar that what if anxiety took over um, Riley's brain? And he showed pictures of himself in front of a birthday cake. And when he's in elementary school, he's just so excited and happy to be there and beaming. And he gets a little bit quieter the next one. And the next one, he's starting to look down. By the time he's a teenager, he's looking down and looks horrified that everybody is singing him happy birthday and wishes everybody would go away. And just how that shift in him in terms of anxiety and self-awareness really taking over, and your identity suddenly, you're not really sure who you are, and should you take your identity from how other people think about you, or is it your anxiety, or what is happening inside of you as this kind of giant shift starts to happen. So we really, though, always approached it from the research on emotions and then our own life experience, both as anxious people, but also as parents of kids. So we really drew from that.
That's a great visual to be able to draw from. Storytelling in the belief system, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And, that was a big thing in the film, Inside Out 2. One of the most powerful parts of it is how belief systems are formed. And I know you care a lot about that, Meg. And that the stories we tell ourselves, how that impacts us every day. And today we've talked a lot about storytelling, and we've had a lot of incredible speakers share their stories and talk about representation, the stories they've seen, but also stories about themselves. Can you each talk about that? We'll start with you, Meg, this time, from a psychological perspective and an artist's perspective. And you can talk about both, Meg, because I know you've learned a lot about psychology as you've been doing this. So we'll start with you, Meg.
Yeah, for years, I've been using belief systems as a way to form characters, because you need to know, like, what does your character believe about the world? What do they believe about themselves? And then how is your act two going to start shifting that so that they can become aware and conscious by the end of act two? What is really dying in the death moment is that old sense of self and that old belief system, and how, as a writer, in your first act, ideally, you're brainwashing the audience to believe what the character believes. So I've always been fascinated in belief systems and the stories we tell ourselves, and it was very exciting to be able to explore that in the movie with my co-writer Dave Holstein, who really was the architect to figure out how to put it in this movie. But it's a very powerful idea, both for personally and for our culture, because there are personal belief systems, i.e., you got a bad grade in math, and then your mother was incredibly disappointed, and that memory has now created a belief in you that creates your sense of self, like I'm bad in math. And this can be coming from your own personal experience, but it also, of course, can be coming from a cultural soup that we're all in the belief systems of our culture. And I think that's where storytelling is incredibly powerful, because we can, through our stories, ask questions about what we all believe and why we believe them, and is that true? So for example, we didn't do the mean girl version of this movie. We didn't do the boyfriend version of the movie. We really wanted to focus on Riley and her own anxiety, and how she's perceiving the world with all of that anxiety rising, and to really keep it on her and, this girl that she so idolizes, who's nice. And so it really, that sense of self forming, and that all of our sense of selves are negative and positive, and that joy is really about self-love and self-compassion for all of those belief systems. So there's different levels. There's the cultural belief systems that we can talk about. I think this film is talking about mental health, and nobody's alone, and everybody has these experiences. Then it's the personal belief systems about how she feels about herself. Is she a good person? Is she bad at math? What does she think about herself? And that ultimately joy is the answer to both of those, which is self-compassion towards yourself and wherever you are.
Yeah, I love that you actually, and as you may know, we just released Teens and Screens for the third year, our research study, and we keep finding that teens really want to see more friendships, and that is exactly what you did, right? And it paid off. Obviously, there was a lot going on, but also that you didn't have the popular girl be mean, And actually, research shows that the truly most popular people are actually nice, kind people. There are popular kids that are, what we see portrayed in movies and TV shows, but there are a lot of popular kids that are exactly like that character. So it's very refreshing.
It's easier to make her a mean girl, honestly, because conflict creates story. But, for Riley, in her current situation of trying to aspire to be older and aspire to be with these girls, she's in the mindset of, this girl's amazing, and she's nice, and she's talking to me. It actually puts more pressure on Riley. It puts more pressure on her to think about who she is, and does she want to be with them, and will she change herself and her sense of self through her anxiety to be with them.
Exactly. So you created conflict, and you created drama, and you created an authentic portrayal, even though you did the more difficult thing. You also did the more accurate thing, and the thing that resonated. So Abigail, I won't call you Dr. Baird. So yeah, talk about the belief systems as well, perhaps even from a neuroscientific point of view, if you want to.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, of course, 2 times everything Meg said, psychologically spot on, of course. And I think one of the things that both films did, I remember being so thrilled to see such a neuropsychologically accurate depiction of really how memory works and is stored and can be called back up to help us form our belief systems, which become our identities. And then what Inside Out 2 captured out so well was how much more complex that becomes during adolescence, because it starts to be informed by the friendships we have, and again, the tension in those friendships, and how those friendships make us feel about our previous memories, and that identity and belief systems are constructed and reconstructed. Both movies also illustrated, with the islands shifting and those connections shifting, how fluid identity can be, especially during adolescence, when you're really trying to figure out what feels right and what fits for you. And again, the illustration with anxiety, that's not an easy process to sort of reckon with the memories you have as a child and the demands of the current situations, and try to make all those things work. And it created such a wonderful teaching tool for a lot of my classes that I couldn't be more grateful, because it's so accurate.
Yeah, and actually, Inside Out, there's actually an app that uses it to teach young people about emotions. And I'm sure there'll be something like that coming out for Inside Out too. And actually, Meg, as you were talking about the belief system, I was thinking about growth mindset. and really think, I'm sure you know about that, growth mindset, meaning that you don't get fixed in your beliefs about yourself. And by having a growth mindset, you're not going to be, I'm bad at math because this one person told me I'm bad at math. It's, so in some ways you were portraying that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it goes into your adulthood. You can catch yourself with beliefs and you can ask yourself, is that true? I believe that about the world. I believe that about myself. I believe that about a relationship. I believe that about the culture. And you just keep asking, is that true? Is that true? It's not, it's easy to do and hard to do at the same time. It's easy, it's a simple question, but it's hard to catch it because so much of our sense of self is the stories we've told ourselves. It can be the stories we've told ourselves about the business, the stories we've told ourselves about our boss, the stories we've told ourselves about our company, anything. It just, there's layers and layers of it.
Well, and that's why the stories that you tell, that storytellers tell, that sort of show young people that you can question these things, that these things aren't fixed, that they are developed and created from culture, society, and how to question them, so you're modeling it, is really critical. One thing, anxiety, like everybody, there's a mental health crisis, everyone's talking about anxiety, my kids are anxious, everybody's anxious. And it's a very common word today. And some research says anxiety can actually be helpful unless it's out of control. So you clearly portrayed anxiety as both out of control but also helpful. Why and how did you choose to portray anxiety in that manner?
When we started, she was a little bit more of a villain. She came in disguised as a mind worker and was really taking over in a subversive way. And she was a little more villainous. And then we had a deeper, darker villain called Shame. But as we worked the story and worked the story, it wasn't, and our director, Kelsey, was very much in lead of, well, that's not how my anxiety feels. My anxiety feels like part of me. It's not something you want to cut out or try to reject. It is there to help you. When I suffer from anxiety, which I do, sometimes I'll say to anxiety, thank you very much. I know you're trying to help me, but I just need you to take a seat because I need you to see I'm not going to die, that all of that's projections are not happening right now and that we're going to be okay. And I've done that since long before I worked on Inside Out. So I kind of knew where I wanted to end her, that help her take a seat and also give her a job to do because she is all of it. It's funny because sometimes people say to me, why did you guys pick such negative emotions? And it's like, they're not negative. That's your judgment on those emotions. They're all very, very important for you to have, including anxiety. She helps keep you focused and on task, and she's necessary. It's just her how. She can kind of get out of control on her how she's going to help you by doing all of her projections and kind of shutting you down. So we really wanted to have that more complex view of anxiety, both from a character point of view, because it's more interesting, but also because it felt more true.
Abigail, how can anxiety be adaptive, and how can we get that out in the culture? One, also helping people learn how to manage anxiety, but also to realize it's not always bad.
I think it's a great question. The first thing to know about anxiety is if you don't have any, you're a psychopath, and that's not a good place to be. And so I don't think anybody really wants that. And you also don't adhere to social norms like wearing clothes to work. So, a little anxiety is actually absolutely adaptive. People vary, and it's something called temperament. From day one, actually, we can gauge in infants how reactive they are to the world. And that day one reactivity does tend to track through the lifespan and predict a fair bit about anxiety or at times hypervigilance. And Meg said it perfectly. Anxiety is there to keep you alive. It's there to run the projections and run the possibilities and try to, figure out, do we need to sound the alarm? Do we need to get different memories on board? Do we need to, go this way instead of that way? And I honestly think anxiety generally is well-intentioned unless it's unchecked. And again, the limbic system, where emotions, are generated, goes through so much change during adolescence, and there's so many more demands on it that I think it can be really tricky for the systems that are trying to keep you safe and trying to keep you on task to stay in line. And so I think if even if you're not going to end up necessarily in a clinically diagnosable anxiety state as an adult, a lot of adolescents do experience really intense bouts of anxiety because there's a lot changing and there is a lot that's new and different, and therefore they need to check and make sure that it's safe.
Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question of Meg, and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. Meg, I really do think you're an exemplar of someone who, and you told us a story about working with teens for this movie, and also clearly you do your deep research and homework and talk to researchers and psychologists. Could you just demystify the process? I mean, that's clearly what the center is hoping to serve
Yeah.
more storytellers like you.
Well, yeah, I mean, we spoke to as many experts as we could. Dr. Keltner, who's an emotional expert on the emotions, and Lisa Demure, who specifically knows about anxiety and anxiety in girls. And she told us all about the glitter jar that she keeps on her desk. So when the girls come in and she shakes the glitter jar to try to give them a visual of what that feels like. And we had the Riley's crew, which were girls from 13 to 16, that they saw every screening. And we got a big Zoom with them after, and they gave us notes, and they took it very, very seriously. They were the most prepared of anybody that we ever showed the movie to, and the most brave in talking about themselves and how it feels and what felt real to them and what didn't. Because, I mean, ultimately, and of course, myself and my own experience with anxiety and Kelsey's experience with anxiety and the people working around us, you have to also be very brave about bringing your own life experience into it. But for sure, we did Riley's crew because we wanted to make sure that what we were saying about anxiety from research and from our own experience was still holding true and authentic for them. Because today's teens, as a therapist said to me once, my son's life is not my life. Like, they have a completely different experience in many ways of what they're dealing with and how they're dealing with it. Things are so changing so quickly. So it was really important to us that we stayed up to date with how they see the world versus even how we experienced it back in the pre-2000s when we were
The
teenagers.
dinosaur age.
Yes, it's a different world. Even from the most simple things, like this wasn't necessarily for Inside Out, but my son, who's 21, they are not as sexually active and doing drugs and all the stuff that we were doing back in the 80s. They're really not doing that. They're much more concerned about other things. So it's important. It's super important to speak to that generation and to speak to the authenticity of what the teenagers are today.
Yeah, we couldn't agree more. Opening it up to questions.
It's nice to meet both of you. I use Inside Out 2 as just such a great example of how the film itself is impact. And I've also dreamed about what if there was a massive impact, social impact campaign attached to that film. How would you, I think some of the challenges some people say is like, well, there's already like a $300 million marketing campaign against Inside Out 2. What would be the value of an impact campaign? How, as a creative, would you try to sell in the value of putting a really robust mental health social impact campaign next to Inside Out 2? Or do you think, it's not really necessary because the story did do so much?
It's a good question. I guess both. As a mom and as a human, of course, I think a social impact campaign would be so great and beneficial and teaching tools. As a storyteller, that's what that's part of being a storyteller. That is the impact. That is what you're hoping will go out and people will receive it as a story, as this experience. And it has, even in the first movie, took on a life of its own. I've had lots of people talk to me. They use the movie and the characters as stuffed animals to talk to nonverbal kids and all different kinds of levels. That it is being used just very quickly into the culture. I think core memories is now a thing that people say, even though we just made it up in the room. So, I think that on one hand, it would be great to have those extras, but at the same time, if you can get the movie right in terms of emotionally and thematically and having an impact itself, you hope that those ripples will still go out.
And Meg knows I spoke to her probably not early enough, but a couple months before, and I was like, "Can we get Pixar?" And as a storyteller, it's a huge, especially with a movie like Inside Out 2. It is a juggernaut. There is like no way that Pixar is going to, they're in control of the distribution and of the campaign, and if their main goal, as you know, is to make money and to have as many people to see it. And since the movie is so good, that is a huge and admirable goal. But I think, that's something, as you know, we've been working on and thinking about, and hoping we can inspire philanthropy to support these campaigns, and then develop relationships with, like Joy was talking earlier, have philanthropy support the campaigns and develop relationships with companies and storytellers who will advocate for it, and create authentic campaigns that might actually incorporate and engage the audience more.
It's tricky too because, everybody at Pixar, is very thoughtful, very emotional, of course, wants to support all of the things that we are talking about. But at the same time, it's an entertainment company, and people don't want to go to a movie to get a lesson. They don't want to go to a movie to be, lectured to. They want to go to a movie to be entertained and have fun and have hopefully an emotional connective experience as part of a catharsis. But it is tricky to try to sell a movie as, what you'll learn. I don't know that a lot of the teenagers would have gone. So I think it's something that if it can happen, it would be a kind of backup to the movie is moving and hitting and people are responding. And now I would think that's when you could bring in the backup versus before.
Yeah, like a wraparound.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We have time for one more.
Hi, thank you so much. Big fan of the work. I'm curious. One of the things that struck me as I was watching Inside Out 2 with my kids, 6 and 3, was that despite the movie aging up, there wasn't a tremendous prevalence of smartphone use. If I recall correctly, there were just a couple of instances. I was wondering if that was by design or if that was just kind of it just happened to be the case. It didn't really fit into the story, and if it was by design, kind of what the conversation was.
We had a little bit more of it in early drafts, but there was a conversation about it because on one hand, it dates the film. So you hope this film will live on and that as people age, they can see different things in it. Each time they watch it, they'll see something different. And if you put social media in, it begins to really put the film in a specific time and place, versus more universal. So that was a concern. And the other concern, just from a storytelling point of view, is it's not that dynamic to watch kids like this, as we all know around the table. Like, this is not that dynamic of a story, versus force them to not do that and put them in a room for over a certain number of days. And now all that stuff that might have been happening on social media is happening in a more dramatic fashion because she's overhearing the older kids talk about her. It's not like somebody sent out a tweet and she's getting caught by her friends. So all of that is a metaphor still for what they do on social media, but it's more happening in real time with real, face to face, because that's just a more dramatic story to tell.
Do we have time for one more in the back? Yeah, actually, I think that was the right choice. We had our teens speaking earlier, and they said they hate content that's trying to get a trend, because 2 years later, they're capturing the trend from right now, and in 2 years, when the movie or show comes out, it's very, very old. So, good choice.
Love Inside Out 2. I've seen it 3 times. But you've talked about how you had sort of this team Riley of your group of 13 to 16-year-olds watching. But obviously this film reached tons and tons of people, and I think lots of littles go and see it. And so what are you hoping that the youngest viewers got out of the film, whether it's from an entertainment or psychological perspective?
Well, for sure, it's got to speak to all ages. And the beauty of Inside Out, as Kelsey describes it, is it can be kind of Looney Tunes. You know what I mean? Like, suddenly they're put in a bottle. Yes, we did have conversations about where did the bottle come from, but it doesn't ultimately matter because that's the world we're in, where things can just appear and disappear. And that the humor that's moving through the movie is very delightful and reaches that age. And that's it's not like consciously, we're not like, okay, we have to do a pass for the comedy for the younger kids. Honestly, Pixar is full of artists and incredible people who just have a young sense of self still. They just, I don't know how they've done it, but they are delighted by that kind of comedy themselves. And you, when you're working on it, you start to kind of remember that. I can't explain it. So that when you're in a room with people and you get on a roll about Pouchy, and our head of story, John Hoffman, is like, you know what I do? I would grab that thing and I would stick my hand in it and I would just try to find out. And then we're laughing so hard, we're like crying because it's so funny and delightful and human, right? Like, why are we dealing with this pouchy thing? Just grab it and take it. So all of that stuff speaks to the younger audience. They can understand that. But the deeper stuff that's maybe rolling through, they'll get older and see it, right? And you'll see it differently when you're a parent. I have to be honest with you. And I will also say, in the first Inside Out, there was a concern that would kids get this? Would they understand emotions inside of a head with memory balls, and would they understand it? So very early on in the process, they did a screening internally for some of the employees and their children, and they did a little film about Riley on the high dive and fear, afraid of her jumping off. And the truth is, the kids got it better than the adults.
That's
They're
always true.
they're much closer to their pure self. So they really just get a lot more than you think they're getting, and sometimes they don't understand why we don't get it. So you try to think about that, but ultimately you just pull from yourself and what delights you.
Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time we have. I really want to thank you, Abigail, coming to us from Vassar, and Meg coming to us from Austin. Thank you for sharing your insights, and have a great rest of your evening. Bye.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me.
Thank you so much.